Okay, I didn't know that a lot of people had this opinion, but apparently a lot of people think that Charlie Kirk was like good at debating, and I would completely disagree. And I'm not just saying this because I disagreed with what he said. I'm just saying his style of debate was horrible. In communications, like in the study of communications, he was objectively doing everything wrong. There was like nothing he was doing correctly. He was domineering, he didn't listen to the other side, he didn't cite his sources, he relied heavily on his faith, which I'm not saying one way or another about what you should believe, but I am saying in a debate with someone, faith is not a good argument because there's no objective truth to it. It's faith. So that's already a problem. But again, he wouldn't let people talk. He would just talk louder and talk over them until they backed down. That's not making you a good debater. And just because you're passionate does not make you good at it. That just means you're passionate. That doesn't mean anything though. He never got anywhere with his points because it was riddled with whataboutism, slippery slope fallacy, like just logical fallacies everywhere. His arguments weren't good. Now, I'm not just saying this because, like, in light of everything, I'm just saying, I've seen multiple videos saying, like, he was good at no, he wasn't. He just wasn't good at what he was doing. He was just loud. But you know what? Loud men, they are sure enjoyed around here. So, what do I know? But apparently a lot of people think that Charlie Kirk was, like, good at debating, and I would completely disagree.
Charlie Kirk was considered a good debater for two reasons: American Christocentrism and American conceptions of masculinity and patriarchy. Do y'all remember when Charlie Kirk went to debate in Cambridge and he was utterly destroyed? And he wasn't just destroyed through the students' argumentation, he was also destroyed because of the debate tactics that he typically uses, which are mostly intimidation, and using his masculinity to make others feel small was not received well by the audience. Before I show the most viral part of that debate, which was his debate with a student regarding abortion, I want to show you the initial student who asked a question and watch how he tries to use his masculinity and his identity to pressure and malign and make the student feel small. But you can tell he feels destabilized when the audience isn't responding well to these shows of power, because these shows of power are not the same thing as having good faith intellectual debate. They're a way to intimidate and denigrate the opponent. And this style was well received on American college campuses, but not so well received within the Cambridge debate process. Let's take a look.
I have quite a simple question for you. Now, I know you've debated Dean Withers on Jubilee before. I was wondering why you now refuse to engage with further debate with him.
Summer, and let me get this straight. I flew 5,000 miles across the world to have you ask why I'm not going to debate a left-wing YouTuber. Debated him twice in the last calendar year. He's coming on my show this summer. Let me be clear, I came to Cambridge to have you ask me that.
This aspect of the debate right here reminds me of Mark Zuckerberg's comments earlier this year that we need more masculinity in the workplace. And this was a thinly veiled way for Mark Zuckerberg to say we need to insulate the power of men within the workplace. And I think what's interesting about tying that to how Charlie Kirk debated is we can see that masculinity is not about engaging the other, or shows of power and patriarchy are not about engaging the other. It's about intimidating your opponent, making your opponent feel small. And within the American debate process, and also within the American workplace, we tend to conflate masculinity with intellect. We tend to conflate masculinity with good leadership. But actually, it's just intellectual bullying. And when you actually have students who are prepared to engage in the debate, you can see that Charlie Kirk is not quite ready to come to the table and have a good faith conversation. Now, Charlie Kirk's time debating in Cambridge didn't only display how the U.S. rewards patriarchal displays of power, it also showed how much of America's debates and American debate culture is based upon Christocentrism. What you'll notice when Charlie Kirk debates the student in the next clip regarding abortion is he cannot debate when the other person does not have the same moral framework as him, because he's often using Christian apologetics to bully his opponent, to confuse them about morality and what is right and what is wrong, and to rope them into a Christocentric conversation. But the moment God is not the moral framework through which they are debating, particularly a Christian nationalist conception of God, he deeply struggles to come to the table and have a good intellectual conversation.
What is it that gives human being this moral worth?
Not its consciousness necessarily.
I didn't say it's consciousness.
I know that I can imagine it because it is a human being, because that is a soul.
And what is this soul? Where does this come from? This idea that it's...
Exactly. I mean, again, the Greeks postulated that it is the entirety of your being. Okay, you guys can laugh. I mean, it's true. I mean,
There's a lot more to unpack here, but I'm so glad we're starting to have the conversation around how Charlie Kirk debated, because it relates to other concepts that are very popular within American culture. The idea that men are better leaders, the idea that shows of patriarchal power are the same as good faith debate, the idea that Christocentrism needs to be the framework through which we understand our collective morality. There's so much to consider. And as someone who is an organizational consultant, I see these same ideas seep into the workplace. Again, the idea that men are better leaders, the idea that intellectual bullying is a show of leadership and strength, the idea that we need to have one moral framework that runs our workplaces versus considering how to marginalized communities consider what a healthy workplace culture is. There's so much to consider here, and I'm curious your thoughts in the comments. And thanks so much for watching. My name is Ciara. I'm a consultant and a progressive theologian, so follow me for more content like this.
America is not systemically racist. Also, we're the least racist country ever to exist in the history of the world. Can you say two true things in a row?
I'm not sure. I'd have to...
Go back to Harvard? Yeah. How'd you get to Harvard if it was so awful? Because if systemic racism is real, well, you went to the best school in the world. Like, that doesn't make any sense. You're arguing against your own story. Like,
no, I'm not.
Only in only in a country as unracist as America could someone like you, who says it's so racist and redlining, also go to Harvard, the best school on the planet.
Do you have a little chip on your shoulder about Harvard?
No, I'm impressed because it's like you're this amazing contradiction. It's like we have to talk about systems of oppression.
What's the contradiction?
Your whole life. It's like you focus on systemic racism, and yet you should be talking about empowerment and prosperity.
Well, you asked me if there was systemic racism. You didn't ask me.
No, that's fine. I know.
You didn't ask me if there are opportunities in America for Black people. You didn't ask me a single thing about how actually I have achieved what I've achieved in this country. You didn't ask me what I do love about America. You didn't ask me why I choose to live here, even though I spent much of my life abroad elsewhere. You asked me what is my critique of America, so I gave it to you. I would be happy to come here and not talk about race. You didn't ask me here to discuss what I focus my political career on. I would love to talk about class issues in America, but that's not the topic of this debate.
No, I mean, I think that's actually more helpful and interesting. My whole thing on this, the race thing, is it's a distraction against our real problems in our country. We're not a racist country. The systems aren't racist to their core.
Why did you design this debate this way?
Marina, do you want to get to the next question?
For Brianna, do you believe that white people are being discriminated against today?
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm talking
Obviously you don't, because this is the facts.
Charlie, I would like to be very specific here.
I was just very specific.
So I'm talking about the GI Bill, which allowed people who had served in our wars, including a lot of Black Americans, to come back and
No, you're talking about redlining, right? So this is redlining.
No, this is connected to redlining.
No, which one do you want to talk about, GI Bill or redlining?
If you allow me to explain, this is connected to redlining.
Okay.
I guess you don't understand that, but I'm happy to explain it to you right now if you just let me get this out. I promise you it'll be worth the effort. The GI Bill gave low interest loans to people who had served in the war, right? And those loans were issued they were federally backed loans. So the banks would issue to people at a low interest rate so that they could buy homes and generate what we now understand to be the basis of middle class wealth in this country. What ended up happening was the process of redlining was that banks said, oh, we're only going to issue loans for you to buy in certain neighborhoods.
Right, Black banks.
All banks.
Right, so why did Black banks do that?
The overwhelming majority of issuers in this country...
No, you got to answer the question. Why did Black banks do that?
I will answer your question. But what I'm talking about is the overwhelming majority of issuers, just like today, even more so back then, the overwhelming majority of issuers were white-owned banks. And those banks redlined communities where they said, we will not issue to people who live in these communities. Now, what ended up happening, what that meant for Black people, was because of what's called a restrictive covenant, which meant that in the covenant that attached to the land for a lease, many of them precluded Black people from buying in those neighborhoods. So basically what happened was banks would only lend to people and give those low interest loans to people who were allowed to live in white neighborhoods, which meant that systemically, Black people weren't able to take advantage of that same low interest loan program that enabled so many white people who ordinarily would not have been able to afford a house because they fought and served in our wars to do so. Now, how many Black banks are in America, and how many Black banks were in America in the 1960s,
if there's even one example,
Charlie?
that's the question.
No, because
but blacks were discriminating against themselves, and whites were being discriminated more than Asian Americans.
This is what's so fascinating.
No, let me answer this question. Why was
Did
Black?
you want me to answer your question about
well,
Black
you're not.
bank
You're dodging and you're dancing.
No, I'm happy to.
Very bluntly.
Let the record reflect that I'm happy to answer your question about Black owners. My point is that
answer the question. Black Americans are about 13 to 14% of the population.
Yes,
about half of all prisoners are Black.
Exactly.
So Blacks commit more crimes than whites do. They commit more murders, they commit more arsons, they commit more kidnappings. For example, Blacks are 13% of the population and they commit 58% of all the murders.
Okay,
Let's talk about it. These are obviously racist claims, but I will respond to them as if Charlie Kirk were a reasonable person.
Black Americans are about 13 to 14% of the population.
Yes,
about half of all prisoners are black.
Wrong. Just 38% of America's prison population is black. That's according to the U.S. government. But it makes you wonder why Charlie feels the need to add an additional 12% to the black prison population. Could it be because his bigoted talking points only work if he exaggerates them? If Charlie were actually looking for the race that makes up half the prison population in the U.S., he'd look no further than white people at 57%.
Exactly.
So blacks commit more crimes than whites do.
Wrong. The word "so" is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence.
Exactly.
So blacks commit more crimes.
He's saying "so" as in therefore, as in one could conclude, but Charlie knows he's lying. Even if he hadn't just lied about the black prison population, Charlie is smart enough to know that correlation does not equal causation, but he's hoping that you don't know that. So he deploys the word "so" to make you think he's coming to an obvious conclusion.
Exactly.
So blacks
Instead, he's making an illogical, racist leap. Charlie knows that we don't have usable data about who commits crimes. It's impossible to have that data since so many crimes go both unreported and or unsolved. Charlie knows that we only have data about arrests and convictions. I'll come back to that data in a moment. What's painfully obvious is that Charlie Kirk isn't interested in understanding the statistics he so carelessly misquotes. He's interested in making bad faith arguments, something that becomes even more obvious in his next point.
blacks are 13% of the population and they commit 58% of all the murders.
Wrong again, and loud this time. If Charlie were interested in honesty, he would have mentioned the other 1350 statistic. Yes, black people are about 13% of the population, but make up 53% of all criminal exonerations. In fact, black people make up 55% of all murder exonerations specifically. Black people are more likely than any other group in this country to be convicted of crimes they did not commit. And then people like you have the nerve to parade these stats around as though they prove something. The reality is that you probably know these stats, but you leave them out on purpose, because to bring that stat into this conversation would make some people think. And that's the last thing a person like you wants.
Unfortunately and tragically, Breonna Taylor got caught in the crossfire. She was not in her bed, however. She was standing in the hallway.
I'm not sure if that makes a massive difference to any of you, but it doesn't make a massive difference to me whether she was in bed or in the hallway.
And so after this, the police return fire back and forth, and Breonna Taylor passes away.
Breonna Taylor passes away in the middle of a gunfight. She just happened to pass away. It was tragic. Nobody knows what happened. Bullets just flying back and forth, and then she just passed away. Or she was shot 6 times by a police officer.
Stochastic terrorism. If people are telling you Charlie Kirk never hurt anyone, the word you're looking for is stochastic terrorism. Stochastic terrorism is when public figures use mass communication to incite violence against specific groups while maintaining plausible deniability. You demonize and dehumanize a group of people. You paint them as an existential threat. You use inflammatory, violent language. Then when someone acts on that rhetoric with actual violence, you get to step back and say, I never told anyone to do that. It's terrorism by statistical probability. You're not directing specific people to commit specific acts. You're just broadcasting hatred to millions, knowing statistically someone's going to act on it. And it works. Misogyny is on the rise, along with calls to remove women's rights. This correlates with rises in domestic violence and harassment. Studies show anti-LGBTQ rhetoric directly correlates to increased violence against queer people. When you have a platform with millions of followers and you consistently tell them that certain groups of people are an abomination or threats to children in society, some percentage of those followers will take action. The insidious part is when violence happened, Kirk got to step back and say, I didn't hurt anyone. But that's not how stochastic terrorism works. You don't need to give explicit instructions when you've spent years painting a target on people's backs. He built his career on hatred disguised as Christianity, violence disguised as patriotism, and eliminationist rhetoric disguised as political discourse. So don't let anyone gaslight you into thinking his words were harmless. Words have impact, platforms have responsibilities, and hatred disguised as righteousness is still hatred.